incredibly lucky to have partnered with the European movement in Scotland to present tonight's debate. Before we begin, though, I would like to thank my show debates conveners, Sarah McGee and Jamie Ghosh, for all their hard work in organising tonight's event. I'd also like to thank in particular Martin Roach for his tireless work in organising tonight's event, and also to all of his colleagues at EMIS for their tireless work, not only in making tonight's event possible, but in helping engage young people in Scotland and making sure that they have access to political life. Now, before we get started, I would just like to give a disclaimer to the audience to not try and shout too much, while I will permit an amusing amount of cackling. Joining us as well, we have an amazing panel of excellent academics and people from EMIS. The motion before the House this evening is this House believes the UK and Scotland should rejoin the EU. And to begin the debate, I'd like to welcome Alyn Smith. Alyn is a former member of the European Parliament for 15 years, a member of Parliament for Stirling from 2019 to 2024. Alyn has been a long leading voice on foreign affairs, agriculture, and Scotland's relationship with the EU. Currently the SNP's candidate for Stirling in the upcoming Scottish Parliament election. He also serves as Vice President of the European Movement of Scotland and Chair of Creative Stirling. Alyn.
Thanks so much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank you all for coming along tonight, and thank you for the invitation. I'll confess I'm doing a wee bit reflective this evening because when I was a student 300 years ago, when I was visiting friends at GUU, I'll confess I never made it past the bar, so it's nice to be in such salubrious surroundings and such good company. But I'm very proud to present the motion to us all this evening to suggest that we need to get back into the European Union, Scotland and the UK. There are a range of views about Scotland's constitutional future on our side of this proposition, I don't doubt. In this room, I don't doubt. That's fine. We agree, on this side at least, that European Union membership is crucial to our recovery from COVID as a society and as an economy. So I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion and very open to points of information, and look forward to the debate. Because I believe that Brexit was a crime against the next generation. Brexit took away rights that I enjoyed, that you won't. And I'm speaking to the younger folks in the room. I took advantage of the Europeans' rights. I was born in 1973. I have never not been European until I wasn't. I took advantage of those rights when I studied at Heidelberg University on the Erasmus year. I studied at Orléans for a semester. I studied at College of Europe. I was a ref on the Costa Brava. You will not see that on any official biographies, but I took advantage of those European rights. I had an entire continent to go and live, work, study around. And you don't. It's still possible, but there's more paperwork, there's more hassle. The UK voluntarily made its horizons and your horizons smaller, narrower, and meaner. And I believe that Brexit was sold on a fundamentally false, dishonest premise. Many of you won't have even been able to vote within the EU referendum. Young people, I always encourage to be involved in politics because you will live with the consequences of political decisions longer than us old folks who made them on your behalf. Your rights have been taken away, and I don't think that's fair. So, as I say, there's a range of views about Scotland's constitutional future within this room. I believe, as an SNP politician, you kind of hope so, I believe Scotland's best future is an independent state, rejoining the European Union, taking our place alongside our neighbours Ireland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, small northern European states that work together. The EU for me is not a transactional arrangement, it's a point of deep identity. I have always been a Scottish European. I have always liked to see politicians and countries working together. Because I think you get more done when you do. I'm also not interested in relitigating old arguments. I accept what happened in the independence referendum in 2014. I accept what happened in the EU referendum in 2016. Much as we could have many happy adventures about Scotland voted clearly to remain and was taken out anyway. There are those who were active in Leave and talking about a democratic deficit. Well, there's one right there. There is a deep injustice in much of it. But I'm talking about the future. I'm talking about 10 years after the EU referendum, a number of years after actually leaving. I believe that people are entitled to believe the promises that are made to them. And this is my point about Brexit being sold on a false premise. The EU Leave campaign was everything you like, you'll keep, everything you don't rate or don't care about or don't understand, we'll get rid of. We'll have sovereignty because what do foreigners know about running countries anyway? Who wouldn't vote for that? People were entitled to believe the promises that were made. 10 years later, we can say with certainty that the UK is a smaller, meaner, more isolated place than it was. And I don't say that with any satisfaction whatsoever. I want to see the UK do well. I want to see Scotland independent, but our closest neighbour and deepest friends should be having a good time as well. And I believe EU membership will be fundamental to that. Because I say the EU is not about a transactional relation for me. It's about international solidarity in action. It's about cooperation across a continent that for millennia has been more used to swords and guns and tanks and bombs than it's been used to dialogue and diplomacy. And the EU is about like-minded countries working together. And in a world where the rules-based international order is under more pressure than it's been since it was established, I think that's important, and I want to see Scotland and the UK part of that. If you told me a year ago that the EU and the UK, one soldier, would be deploying troops to Greenland to put off potential US hostility, I would not have agreed. I would not take me seriously. The world is in a deeply unstable, deeply unpleasant place. And a lot of people are very adrift from their moorings, and I believe having friends and allies that work together is all the more important. And it grieves me that the UK is outside the EU looking in. So I think we can do better. And the loss of rights that we have suffered, you have suffered, we get back. And there is an element of the UK debate that says, well, the EU should just give us those rights anyway. It's unfair. No, it's not. The UK decided voluntarily to not be a member of the EU, and once you leave the club, you're not members and you don't get the goodies. I want the rights that you should have to be part of the European Union, to live, work, study, eventually retire in the EU on that territory. And we get that back with rejoining the EU. So I'm not interested in relitigating old battles. And I am glad to see some movement within the UK that people in some parties are talking about rejoining the customs union, the single market. I'm clear. It's EU membership that is the best option for Scotland and the UK and for all of you in this room. So I hope you'll back the proposition this evening. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Scanlan. Dr. Scanlan is a lecturer in politics at the University of Glasgow and co-convener of Politics 1A, along with an honours course on populism. He's a former Eurocrat with sorts of having spent several years as a press officer for an MEP decades ago. As well as being a published author on populism, he is also co-author of the Scottish Liberal Democrats 2004 Euro Elections Manifesto, something he generally keeps quiet.
Can't believe you asked me back. How far down the list did you have to go to get me? Like, the janitor at the Rankin building? No, she says no, come on, get Scanlan. Right, last time I stood here, it was a Celtic-supported Republican trying to argue why Irish reunification was a bad idea. Clearly I like losing these things because here I am again, having obviously not offended enough people last time, to be banned for life and try and convince a bunch of wishy-washy, liberal undergraduates in Eurostats that rejoining the sainted EU is a bad idea. How am I doing so far? As you've heard, I spent a few years in the early noughties working as a press officer for Lib Dem MEP. Well, it was early noughties, a lot of people were Lib Dem back then. A lot of people do things they regret in their youth, that was mine. So I have first-hand experience of the strengths and limitations of the EU. I also know where to get the best freaks in Brussels, these are all talk probably. The Celtic bar I used to frequent was shortly after I stopped spending time in Brussels. This might not be unrelated. Brexit was a bad idea, there's no two ways about it. It's critically damaged our economy, it's caused untold harm to higher education, it's taken opportunities away from your generation, it is argued it is added immeasurably to the vile anti-migrant mood in the UK, but I'm going to argue that rejoining the EU anytime soon is a very bad idea. So I used to love the EU. Couldn't get enough of it. I was a disciple of the European idea, whatever that is. I thought it was a force for good, for peace, for prosperity, for human rights. Then the global financial crisis happened. I watched how the EU punished countries such as Portugal, Ireland and Greece. I watched the response to the Syriza government in Greece trying to create an alternative to neoliberalism being crushed by the EU, and I stopped thinking this is a force for good, and I started thinking this is a force for neoliberalism. Then I thought, okay, so what is neoliberalism? And what are the alternatives? And then I thought, oh, I could give up a career in public relations and do a PhD in this. 9 years later, here I am. But while this was going on, I also watched the democratic backsliding in countries like Hungary and Poland. I watched clampdowns on refugee rights and LGBTQIA+ rights in these countries, and the EU doing some sort of hee-haw about it. I thought the only way the EU would give a damn about LGBTQA rights is if Orban tried to nationalise them. So I don't understand why people love the EU. It's a problematic trading bloc whose primary purpose is to defend capital. A purpose which trumps everything else. To be fair, I don't understand why people put all their faith in any political structure, leader or party. I mean, I could go on all day about how problematic the EU is, but that's not my point. For me, the EU is like FIFA. It is self-serving, it is arrogant, it is elitist, it's unreformable. But, like FIFA, if you want to be at the game, it's probably a good idea to be a member. So if this is true, why not push to rejoin? Well, there's a number of reasons. And why push through? Hello? No, there is never one reason for anything. But I'm going to focus on the political reasons, as these are, in my opinion, the most pressing. 2016 referendum was toxic. It was a populist radical right uprising against a political class that seemed to have left the people behind. It came after the MP expenses crisis, critically damaged public trust in system politics, a trust still not rebuilt. It came during the worst of Tory austerity, and framing the EU membership, as happened at that referendum, on a doctrine of prosperity to an electorate that was, and indeed still is, scratching its arse for pennies, was never going to work. So the electorate gave the political classes of the UK a kicking. And whilst I found the xenophobia and the racism that underpinned some of this repellent, I'd be lying if I didn't think this kicking was to a certain degree justified. It split the country, and the wounds are nowhere close to healing. Do we want to go through the trauma of this again, when we could have the opportunity of a stronger relationship with the EU without another referendum? We could have a customs union. We could even possibly return to free movement. We could have this Starmer, or whoever replaces him after Labour get battered like a Keats and Paisley in the May elections, finds what passes for a backbone of the Parliamentary Labour Party. See, if you've been to one of my lectures, you'll know that I take quite a flippant view of politics, and there's a reason for this. It's absolutely bloody terrifying. And if you didn't laugh, you'd curl up on a ball and sob. I'm very glad there's a tablecloth here, because I might be doing that later. But I'm genuinely scared of a reformed UK government. I find them and everything they stand for abhorrent. I look at the slide into authoritarianism in the US, and I genuinely worry this is our future here. And it's not the job of political scientists to predict the future, but my worry is that if Labour were to put a rejoin referendum on the 2029 platform, they are handing the election on a plate to Farage. That does not bear thinking about. And while opinion polls suggest that the majority of the electorate would like us to rejoin, they also suggest that it's not a priority. Only around about a third of people think this is a priority. The salience of this is critical. You see, the reason for Labour's catastrophic result in 2019 are complex, as is always the case in politics. But one of them was the promised second referendum, especially in Brexit voting Labour constituencies. The red wall crumbled, Johnson got a significant majority, and the rest is 5 years that me, and I'm sure a few of you, would rather forget. These 5 years would be a walk in the park compared to what awaits us if Farage and his crew of Chancellor get in. I'm so excited about a reformed UK government telling academics that we can't call genocide genocide. We can't say that trans rights are human rights, and we can't say that fascism is, on balance, probably a bad thing. I cannot wait to see forced deportations, the rollback of our hard-fought minority rights and worker rights, and our economy monumented bollocks right on. I wish Brexit had never happened. I hate that the boomers fucked it for everybody yet again, but they did. And we have to deal with what is rather than what we would like to be. This is the reality of politics. Defending our fragile, and my God it is fragile, democracy against the radical right should be our priority. Nothing should come before it. Thank you for listening. Please oppose the proposition, and remember, defend democracy against the radical right, including with civil disobedience, and worry about problematic trading blocks and Reform UK have been consigned to the shitty nappy-filled landfill where they belong. Thank you.
For being here. One of them is that I used to wear that black gown there and spend huge amounts of time debating in this august arena, sent me to Canada as one half of the UK debating team in the happy days when governments had too much money, and I discovered the pleasures of debating from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island, all on public money. Amazing. And the second reason, the first one gave me a taste for travelling internationally at other people's expense. And I warmly commend that example to you in your future professional lives. Travel at other people's expense is more comfortable. You see, she agreed. The second reason for having eligibility to participate in this grand gathering is that I, and there aren't many, lost my job because of Brexit. In 5 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks ago, my mandate at the European Court came to an end. So I'd like to share with you a personal recollection, and then I'd like to give you an example, and then I'd like to offer a warning. So the personal recollection is this. I was a judge in Luxembourg. Fascinating, fascinating job. 28 countries, 24 official languages, one working language, which was French. And so we sat as 3s or 5s or 15s, depending on the importance of the case. The other judges had a huge range of backgrounds. If you were to look at the Scottish bench or the London bench, you would see a predominantly male, predominantly privately educated, trained bunch of barristers and advocates, and a few outsiders. But in Luxembourg at the court, much, much, much variety. So one was the secretary of a queen, one was a canon lawyer, a number were criminal prosecutors, several were professors, only a few were practicing lawyers. And the political background that they came from was vastly different. I sat with a man who grew up under Stalin, whose first language was Russian, who at the end of a deliberation would tell fantastic stories, hilarious ones, about the KGB, the nun, and the psychiatrist, and the all that. And so, when we had a case, we would discover that people approached the question of prescription, as to say lapse of time, or statutory construction, as what do these words really mean? Discretion. Those notions varied hugely. but we were 3 or 5 or 15, and we had to reach an agreement. And that sometimes was easy, and common sense worked, but sometimes deep principles blocked it. So we had to haggle and haggle and haggle to agree on a solution. Now, my uncle served in the First World War. My cousin was killed in the Second. If you speak to your parents or maybe your grandparents, they will tell you, I hope, stories about conflict, about blood, about war. And one of the magnificent things which the European Union, as it's now called, achieved was the end of military rivalry in Western Europe. And the second thing it achieved, maybe 20 years later, was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So whatever we may say about the failures of the European Union, and whatever lawyers may say about one or other judgment where the court got it wrong, maybe they did, but there is no doubt in my mind that a solution by compromise, discussion and negotiation is better to conflict. So that's my personal recollection of participating to a small degree in the creation of the European Union. Now, second I was going to talk about is a practical example. Many people here may be engineers. If so, confess. Oh, well, okay, all right, an endangered species. This is the University of Kelvin. I would have hoped for more. But if you're an engineer, you'll know, or you should know, about patents. A patent is a deal between the state and the inventor. The deal is the inventor explains in writing how a particular new technique works. And in exchange for this disclosure, the inventor is given a monopoly for 20 years. That's well established. Goes back to the treaty, is that 5 minutes or 6? Ooh, dear me. Right. Biotechnological inventions cannot conveniently be described without access to the glop, the glue, the magic organic substance. And so there was, a number of years ago, no consensus in the European Union about how to protect biotechnological inventions. And I had a slight personal involvement in it. A new regime was designed by the European Union in conjunction with 28 countries, and now we have a single system for the patenting of biotechnological inventions. So it is wrong to regard Europe as the source of the imposing on grumpy member states of unreasonable and impractical solutions. Now, I'm going to overrun shamelessly. Mr. President, you may gavel me down, but I shall say a wee bit more. Here's the warning. During the Brexit campaign, we were told things will be better. We'll be able to do our own deals. We'll be able to reach happy solutions to problems. And I wrote an article, which you all should have read before coming here, entitled The Search for Unicorns. And I described 5 unicorns and 5 monsters. And one of the unicorns is wonderful trade deals. The United States, we can do wonderful things. What is the wonderful deal we have with the United States? Well, it is a deal with Indiana. We didn't need to leave the European Union to sign this deal with Indiana because it's pretty spineless. It says, according to Article 10, it's not legally binding. It doesn't create any legal, equitable, or financial rights, obligations, or liabilities for the participants. It contemplates friendly cooperation, close relations, and deep cooperation in removing barriers to trade. That is to say, the prospect of prosperity outside the European Union was garbage. And friends, young people, you cannot read the newspapers today without fearing that the UK, outside the European Union, looking to the United States as an ally, is barking up the wrong tree, to mix my metaphor sorry. So, I end by saying, advocates who speak in favour of a wicked man in court are not themselves wicked. Be sympathetic to the three persons who have the duty of opposing the motion now. It's not their fault. I won't suggest how you vote other than saying the answer, vote wisely.
For that fine speech. And to continue the debate for side opposition, I'd like to welcome Harry Bray. Hailing from Proctamian, Stirlingshire, Harry Bray is a second-year law student and an accomplished debater here at the Glasgow University Union. He's represented the GEU at the European and World Championships, including most recently in Sofia, Bulgaria, during the winter holidays. Harry also serves as the Union's Deputy Junior Debates Trainer and a Whig parliamentary clerk.
I'd like to begin with a wee bit of crowd work. Can you put your hands up if you can remember very well the day Britain left the EU? And can you put your hand up if you remember the end of that process? So, with the day when Britain left the EU was one of my earliest political memories. I was 10 years old on the day in which they did it. What I remember then, thereafter, in the imperfect memory of a child, was 4 years of chaos, division, and very little change in British politics. They were 4 lost years, in which there was very little progress on anything, in which our Parliament ground to a halt, in which there was little new legislation. Brexit was a disaster, but I doubted that Rejoin would be much better at all. I fear that if we were to seek to rejoin the EU, there is no turning back the clock. The process would be long, it would be difficult, and I don't think Britain is ready for it. I don't think Britain is in a position today when you can lose at least another 4 years to the process of going back into Europe. There are too many pressing questions, there are too many pressing problems that requires Britain to get moving without focusing again on Europe. I think it is important to recognise here that you can't get away from the practicalities. Under Section 49 of the Treaty of the European Union, Britain must rejoin under the ordinary terms of another candidate member state. This means when Britain is rejoining the EU, there is no easy path, there is no shortcut back in. We are going to have to do it the hard way. And what this means is a years-long process. This means Britain subjecting itself to strenuous tests. This means that for years Parliament is going to be clogged up by this. I ask you, why was Brexit such a disaster? Precisely because in the British political system, a small group of MPs could bring Parliament to a standstill completely. They could hold up legislation, they could create trouble. In that way, 2016-2020 dropped off the British political map. It was 4 years to make a single decision. It was 4 years to reach a single deal. When we are going back into the EU, I do not see why this process is likely to be shortened. Even in better times, like the 2007 accession of Bulgaria and Romania, it took 7 years for the process to be completed. In our times when the British economy is not strong, the economies of Europe are not strong, I don't see how this process is going to be shortened. We are facing rejoining the EU. We are facing using at least the rest of this decade to do so. And I'm not sure that in Britain we can really take it. Because I think joining the EU is an issue that uniquely fuels the fires of Faragism. I think it is a problem that will allow Farage to play on his own turf. I think it will allow him to consolidate his base. I think it will allow him to rally everyone around the cause which he has won before. I think when you do this, when you move the political discussion in the UK onto this turf, progressive forces are always going to face an uphill struggle. I think any other issue, the cost of living, affordability, the state of the economy, the state of the NHS, is a far more difficult one for reform to fight. I think for our politics, and the rest of this decade becomes about that, progressive forces have a much, much better outlook. I think if we allow Europe to obsess British politics once again, then I think we just face another process of Brexit. And I also question whether it's a process that is correct for Europe. Because I'll note, I think that while the majority of British people support going back into the EU currently, they do not support going back onto the EU in the terms which they have to accept. Because we know that when Britain is rejoining like any other member state, we are not getting the previous concessions. Britain going back into the EU means Britain accepting the euro, means Britain accepting the Schengen area, and Britain not getting the rebate. And on these conditions, only 36% of the British public currently support going back into the EU. So, therefore, we are faced with a situation in which Britain would have to go in on terms for which there are no popular support. And the alternative simply isn't there. From Western Europe, there is no support for Britain getting special treatment once again. Unpopular governments in Europe simply can't make the case. They simply can't make the case for making Britain an exception once again. There is no way in which Britain is getting an easy route back into the EU. What they have to accept is going the hard way. And it's attractive to nobody, and it's unlikely to prove very popular in the long run. But even if we assume it can be done, we must question whether it's right for the EU. We've heard very little about the importance of the European project. The European project has uniquely ensured peace on the continent. It has uniquely brought about a political system that is based on dialogue and discussion instead of war. And it's based on the principle of the ever closer union. When the founding fathers of the EU, and Schuman, when Monet, and others came forward and wanted to create their union, they wanted a solid union, they wanted a strong union. But I fear that a union in which Britain has rejoined is unlikely to be these things. Because I fear that Britain is always likely to be a destructive member. Precisely because in Britain we always want the exception. We don't want to accept the ever closer union. We don't want to accept full political integration. I fear that in a world in which Britain rejoins the EU, we are putting the entire EU at a disadvantage. Precisely because the processes of integration that are key for continuing the European project are likely to be more difficult. When as a large nation, consistently likely to be opposing these changes, it becomes more difficult. It gives credence to those Eurosceptic elements already within the EU, in Denmark, in Hungary, in Poland. When they have a British government that is likely to be pushing against closer integration, that is likely to be pushing against integration with the EU, then I think it is more difficult to further the ends of the European movement. Ultimately, I think Britain is simply too destructive a menace to go back into the EU at this time. I don't think Britain is going to act like a good European, and therefore I think for the sake of Europe, it ought to stay out. I think we are faced with a very clear choice as to what our future has to be about. Are we willing to repeat history? Are we willing to go through another 4 years in which British politics are going to revolve around the question of Europe, in which the right are going to be able to be given a stomping ground, in which it is far more difficult to challenge them than any other? Is it right that we would spend 4 more years, the rest of the 2020s, doing this rather than focusing on the very real things that are wrong in the British public services, that are very much wrong in the British economy? There's only so much time and attention the media can have. There's only so much time and attention that Parliament can have. When we are considering the outlook for the UK, for Scotland and for the EU, there is only limited time. There is only limited resources. So I ask the audience, can Scotland afford to repeat history? Can the UK afford to repeat history? Can the EU afford to repeat history in going through a long, interminable process of trying to get integration that is unpopular and difficult? If the answer is no, then this motion must be rejected. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our speaker for that fine speech. To close the debate for side proposition, I'd like to welcome Amelia Faulkner. Amelia is a second-year law student and a distinguished parliamentary speaker for the Whig Club in this chamber, and also the Publicity and Social Secretary of the Dialectic Society. She is also a highly accomplished public speaker, as Amelia previously won Best Rhetoric in the Dialectic Society's Rhetoric Cup.
Deputy Speaker, Honourable and Right Honourable Members of the Chamber, distinguished guests in the gallery.
Here.
Did it not always annoy you as a child when your parents told you what to do? When you're instructed to go clean your room or go study, you will do this, you will study that, you will be home by curfew. Even if you didn't experience this, being dictated for you. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. I fear that to some extent this is what's happened with Brexit. And as a young person, I would like to take the opportunity to close said government by expanding on the cases presented by said government and prioritising the long-term benefits of rejoining by focusing on us, young people, and our futures. In the 2016 referendum, around 17% of young people voted to remain. Almost 3/4 of us didn't want Brexit, didn't think it would be beneficial, and here we are, almost like children being told what to do, living in a UK where we're not part of the EU just because the adults decided otherwise. And before side opposition would make a point on this, I understand the practicality. It would have been absurd to let the likes of 10-year-old me, who was just obsessed with a man as a pony was on TV that night, to vote. It's impractical to consider the idea that 64% of young people didn't exercise the right to vote. But it's now 2026. We're older, we're wiser, and we know what we want. And in 2024 polls, 84% of young voters said that they would vote to rejoin with another referendum be called. This is because it's our futures that are on the line, and in so many ways, the best version of our future is one where we're part of the EU. Señor orador, señores, tengo una pregunta, especialmente para los jóvenes aquí. ¿Quién aquí tiene planes para el futuro? I'll ask again in English. Who here, in particular the young people watching, has plans for the future? Plans to graduate, perhaps to get a job at a big company, to make a lot of money, or to travel the world. I'm someone myself who's always had a plan, always known what I wanted to do in my life. I must have been, 11 when I said for the first time that I wanted to study law and Spanish at Glasgow University, and here I am, filling that dream. But honestly, in this day and age, the degree isn't nearly as fulfilling as I once hoped it is.
Estoy estudiando computación, no tengo prospectos para el futuro.
One of the first memories of my university career, especially week 2024, at the show place, where I walked into the gallery of this very chamber, a timid little first year who didn't know anyone, and I sat next to a random girl that I thought looked friendly. And it turned out she was doing the exact same course as me, a fourth year. Now I'd like you to try and imagine this scenario and think about all the possible things she could have said to me. Was it, wow, my year abroad was such an incredible experience, you're going to love it? Was it, oh, it was a little bit difficult, but it's a once in a lifetime opportunity? Or was it, drop Spanish while you still can? I'm sorry? The loss of Erasmus was a shock felt all across the country, with the number of students studying languages sharply decreasing. There are now 30% less language students than there were before Brexit. Less than 3% of A-levels taken are languages, and more people study subjects such as physical education than French, German, Gaelic combined. The British language crisis has gotten so bad that universities such as Aberdeen and Nottingham are considering scrapping the degrees altogether. And while this is a move in the right direction that the UK will be rejoining the Erasmus scheme in 2027, it's certainly better than the domestic touring scheme we're currently operating under. It works best within EU membership.
I mean, absolutely terrible that language is being forced out, and my colleagues in my UCU college lose their jobs, but can you prove that this is related to Brexit, or is it just changing educational demands from young people because this is going through school as well? The fact that one thing is happening at the same time as another thing, come home and go Proctor box, or I should know.
There may not be consistent correlation that we can identify at any point, but it's the likes of saying, oh, well, inflation is currently happening within our country. You cannot pinpoint that down on COVID specifically or Russia invading Ukraine. You cannot pinpoint that on Brexit specifically. But it's undeniable that Brexit has had an impact. It may not have contributed entirely, but it certainly had an impact on this. We'll return to that later. But we plan to rejoin Erasmus, we will be as a third-party associate rather than a role-maker. We will contribute, but not be able to make any decisions or have any influence. And that goes against the sovereignty that supporters of the opposition want us to have. It is also costing us 4 times what it did before for no extra real benefit, and that's with us being allowed a 30% discount. It will never be the same. Students will still need to apply for visas, an expensive and time-consuming process that, in all honesty, many young people are too lazy to engage with. Without freedom of movement, inbound student mobility can never be expanded to the same as it was, meaning our campuses will not have as much cultural diversity and multilingualism. Freedom of movement is a huge loss for UK nationals. Before Brexit, we were able to live, study and work in 27 different countries freely. With the EU having a population of nearly 450 million people, it was the largest nearby labour market that we had free access to. And despite being able to travel, building a life abroad is not the same as booking a holiday. Even if you had no interest in working abroad, this also has a severe impact on access to labour. More than half of the members of the Confederation of the British Industry are worried that without free movement, there are not enough skilled workers in the UK. If we rejoin the EU, the larger the pool, the more opportunities for us, and the more opportunities for Britain to grow and prosper as a country. It's a win-win. In terms of trade in the economy, it is undeniable that the UK is in quite stages now, with the levels of recession, as I have previously mentioned. And while it is difficult to pinpoint which parts of these specifically were caused by Brexit, as described in the Brexit files reports, the consequences of Brexit are slow puncture. The Office for Budget Responsibility predicts that, in the long term, exports and imports of goods and services will decrease by 15%, and the overall size of the British economy will fall by 4%, to the equivalent of a loss of around £100 billion. This is despite entering trade agreements with countries such as Australia, New Zealand, India, and the US, set to increase the GDP by a mere 0.57% at most. And these connections include significantly higher trade tariffs than we had as an EU country. With access to the single market, we will be restored to having free movement of goods, services and capital in one of the largest and most prosperous markets in the world, reduce trade barriers and contribute to economic growth. There are many concerns as well about the cost of re-entering the EU. Through your time as an EU member, it is said, as side opposition brought up, that we would spend approximately £215 million a week as a net contributor to the EU budget. When leaving the EU, we were told that this money would be spent for our public services, such as the NHS, which 6 years down the line have still not received sufficient funding to not be struggling. Therefore, in the long run, we believe that it is more vital to invest connections as a member of the EU. We may not know exactly what the future holds for this country, but do you know what we do know? We know who holds the future. And in order to live your life with access to different professions and opportunities, to live in a world that's freer, more prosperous and with a stronger economy, we urge you to believe that Scotland and the UK should rejoin the EU, and we urge you to take government. Thank
From side opposition to conclude the debate as a whole, I'd like to welcome Harvey. Harvey recently served as the union's senior debates trainer, and through his time in the union has acquired an accomplished debating CV. His most recent accomplishment is breaking as a judge at the European Debating Championships and adjudicating a semi-final. He has also won the St Andrews Open and represented the union at several major international debating tournaments, including multiple World University Debating Championships.
Deputy Speaker, Honourable and Right Honourable Members of the Chamber, distinguished strangers in the gallery. I have a piece of advice for you. Don't get back with your ex. I know you really want to, I know you miss them, but you're only remembering the good parts. The reasons you broke up are still there, and you're never going to regain their trust. Fundamentally, most of the country has the same issues they had in the EU they had in 2016. And it breaks my heart because I do still love the EU, but most people are not comfortable with the agreements they would have to enter to rejoin the Union. They're not comfortable with the concessions they would have to make in regards to currency agreements, and ultimately, the EU is not either. The process of rejoining the EU would be a nightmare and is pretty much equivalent to getting back with your ex, which I hope we all know is a terrible idea. Look, Britain stands at the precipice of fascism. Reform UK is surging in pause, and we must do everything we can to combat them. I really would have liked an Erasmus here in Germany, but I do just think the UK has more pressing concerns than the worries of students who are now slightly less able to access Erasmus because they're kind of lazy. Fundamentally, we must fight for the most fundamental rights of Britain, for the most pressing concerns, and this would destroy our political process for a matter of decades. What I want to do now then is look at the benefits that are offered to us by government bench and see if they are really worth the quagmire which the process of rejoining the EU would thrust us into. The first is in regards then to our rights to travel abroad. I would note that much of this has been reconstructed already by the government. As in, it is unclear to me why we need to rejoin the EU to get Erasmus when we already have Erasmus back. Yes, it's a little bit more difficult. Yes, it's not as good as it was, but it's basically there. And the students going on Erasmus are usually posh, usually privileged, and can basically afford to do a tiny bit more bureaucracy, which is fundamentally what we need, not to completely destroy the political process of the United Kingdom for decades. Secondarily then, first of all, the Honourable Speaker on the side lost their job. They were a judge, I assume they will be fine in the long term. And whilst I do lament any misfortune which befalls a member of the dialectic society, again, fascism, a judge losing their job, difficult one, but I'm going to have to go with preventing fascism. I apologise to deride the august status of this chamber, but since you're leaving, it has more but so become a place of Nero. That said, let us look then at further benefits. Additionally then, they say, the European Union has prevented war. First of all, it is unclear to me why the European Union is the only way that Britain can actually do this. As in, we do still have NATO, and we do still have strategic alliances with the European Union to maintain a world of peace. But secondarily, if the European Union's mandate is to prevent war in Europe, I would ask Ukraine how that's going. They actually haven't achieved that goal. Russia was aided and abetted as an imperialist power by the EU and powers like Angela Merkel, who actively traded with Russia and increased its power in the region. The goal of preventing war in Europe has been a unanimous failure on part of the EU, and it is not clear why rejoining the institution would get us any closer to that goal. It is therefore the case that even if leaving the EU was a mistake, and perhaps maybe the EU was at providing policy to protect the world, rejoining it offers us no clear benefit in reconstructing peace in Europe. Let us look then at the economic benefits. Well, unfortunately, there aren't many. First of all, the EU itself is in a myriad crisis. It has a currency union, but no fiscal union, meaning it has had an impossibility in raising debt or any other financial measures to fund things like green transitions, to fund things like competition AI, to fund broad technological development. In addition, it is full of states which themselves can be described as far-right, generously fascist at worst, who have continuously vetoed any progress within the Union. It is ultimately a union which is failing, a union which is not delivering economic returns or fundamental benefits to its constituent members. And whilst the UK leaving was a mistake and required painful restructuring of our economy is being restructured, and if we rejoin the EU, we're going to have to do it all over again and experience that pain once more. It is not clear to me then that rejoining the European Union would actually deliver us any substantive economic benefits when the trade-like relations used to build the outside world have been established. Look, I don't like the US, but they are the most wealthy power in the world. They are currently ruled by a madman who likes the UK a lot more than the EU. We have actually built broadly better trade relations under an independent scheme than we will have within the European Union. And once again, overall leaving the European Union is lamentable. This is not about whether we lament the leaving of the Union, it is about whether we ought to return to it. And frankly, no, we shouldn't. It will be an utter bloody disaster. Bloody is on the edge case, but I feel like I can say it in the chamber. Before I progress with my speech, would any of the members of the government panel have a point to raise to me?
Yes. What about the cheesemaker for whose exports to the European Union it is too costly to go through the health checks?
Well, first of all, the UK government has already achieved measures in moving towards a customs union, in making trade with the European Union visa, in aligning regulations. We don't need to go through the entire process of rejoining the European Union, which is a fantasy, to regain some of the benefits which we lost whilst leaving. Secondarily, they can sell their cheese to Canada or Australia or America. Again, we've already structured our economy around these agreements, and as much as I would like for this cheesemaker to be as well off as possible, fundamentally, it is not the case that this is something we're going to be able to rebuild. Look, 20% of voters, only 20% believe Labour has the mandate to rejoin the EU. When the Labour government is already in crisis because it is perceived as undemocratic due to measures like UKID, taking a measure which they have not been elected on the basis of, which was not in their manifesto, which does not appear anywhere within their ideological platform, which fundamentally destroy Labour's credibility at the time when they are the only alternative to the rising threat of reform. Rejoining the EU would be equally perilous because European technocrats understand that the next people in government will be bloody insane, as in reform, meaning they are likely to delay the process. They are likely to impose strict and harsh measures in how the UK rejoins. They are likely to do things like require further concessions, such as joining the euro. This is going to be a process which is lengthy and painful and costly for the members of Europe, for the members of Britain, and which will harm both unions, making them worse for their inhabitants. I do wish we could return to a world in which we lived in the European Union. I do wish we could instantly teleport back to 2016 and change the outcome of the referendum. But that is not fundamentally the world we live in. The proposition that government must stand behind is one where we actively take measures to rejoin the EU. And the benefits they describe, first of all, are not clear in the manifestation because they are simply the benefits that we had when we were in the EU, not when we rejoin, and will require substantially harsher concessions. But secondarily, are not told to us why we ought to care more about them than the imminent political threats which the UK faces, than the absolute political collapse which the UK will experience for a decade. Fundamentally, if what we care about is building a better future, we cannot risk dividing the country once more, such that we cannot achieve the fundamental reforms and measures that the UK needs to become a prosperous society once more. Joining the EU is a mere distraction, it will not be our saviour.
We'll now move into a vote of affirmation to allow the audience to decide which side of the debate to go on. So I invite you all to just yell, shout, bang on the seats when the side is called that you support. So all those for side proposition. I do think that on the audience's vote, it's side proposition.
Chasing